Hello, this is just a short little disclaimer before we start the actual podcast. We were originally going to do both the Clayton Tunnel railway crash and the Staplehurst rail crash, but we ended up having a lot to talk about just the Clayton Tunnel rail crash.
They're just too interesting.
It was just too interesting. So that's what we've ended up focusing on for this podcast. You will hear references to the Staplehurst rail crash, but we will not be discussing it, unfortunately. Thank you for your understanding.
Next episode.
Next episode. Hello, and welcome to a Victorian scholarly podcast featuring myself, Angel Ramirez, and my good friend, Jared Sitton.
Hello.
Today, we will be talking about trains in the Victorian era. Specifically, railway crashes. Even more specifically, the Clayton Tunnel railway crash and the Staplehurst crash. So, I have done the research into these crashes, and Jared
has not.
Jared has not. So, Jared here is going to be questioning and commenting on the various things that I may say. I hope, at least. And he should provide a relatable viewpoint that is at least differently biased to my own, considering he has done no research on this subject. That being said, you probably do have some knowledge lying around from probably high school English classes and history classes and things like that, which, I mean, really only adds to the relatability with the average listener. So I hope that we can all learn something today about these topics. Have you ever heard of the Clayton Tunnel rail crash, Jared?
I have not.
You have not, and they can probably barely hear you. Here you go. Well, as you might imagine, it is a rail crash that happened involving Clayton Tunnel, and it happened on Sunday, the 25th of August in 1861.
That's not far from today.
That,
Not the year, but
yeah,
the day.
Okay, yeah, I mean, you're right. So around a little bit less fall-y than it's been recently, but yeah, around that time. And this first source that I have, it's a newspaper, it's a primary source. It's from Bell's Weekly Messenger, and it came out Monday the 26th of August, 1861, the day after the crash. And I wanted to mention the title. I mean, I'm going to say the title of each of these, but I there's a theme that runs through with these titles, and they're all very simple. And I think that just has to do with the fact that I know I'm very used to sort of very sensationalized news titles. What about you, Jared? You know what I'm talking about, right?
I do.
Yeah. So, it's very interesting because the title of this is Terrible Railway Accident.
Oh, yeah, I thought it'd be worse.
What?
I thought it'd be worse.
Worse, like what?
Like, rail crash shocks the nation.
Right? Yeah,
like,
yeah, exactly.
Victims in disarray.
Yeah, so, I mean, they were definitely in disarray.
Recovery not in sight or something like
Jeez.
that.
Yeah, recovery was not in sight for some of these people, but it's a very simple title. You don't even know you don't even know where it is, which arguably is a form of Victorian clickbait on its own.
Also,
because
where was this?
Clayton Tunnel.
Yeah, but where is Clayton Tunnel?
London, I believe. I think, well, is it bad that I don't know the exact location? Actually, I think it's just in Clayton. So this incident involved a series of, let's say, miscommunications, or maybe a bit of a lack of communication.
Mm-hmm.
It was a bit of a complicated issue, but one that we will talk about. So, the first train leaves Brighton Station, gets to Clayton Tunnel, no issues, it's all good, right? The problems start when the next train arrives a little bit earlier than anticipated.
Which is
So-
usually a good thing.
You right?
Yeah.
For the passengers at least.
Mm.
Well, the problem wasn't that it arrived; it also left quicker.
Mhm.
So it kind of piles up into these guys are here too quickly, and the way the tunnel works is that you're supposed to like have one train in there at a time
Yeah,
because they can catch up,
Mhm.
and that's bad.
It's like roller coasters have a system where the whole track is separated into various blocks, and then they only allow one car to be in one like section of track,
Mhm.
and then like one car will cross a sensor, and then if another car crosses that same sensor before that first one crosses the ending sensor, then everything shuts down because they've gotten too close together.
Well, that would have been a great system back in 1861, let me tell you.
Mm-hmm.
But they had people, signalmen, who were on both ends of the tunnel, who would kind of try and make sure everything was going good.
Were they going both directions through the tunnel? Or were they going
No, they were going the
direction?
same direction. So yeah, so the issue was worrying about one catching up to the other one, which was a possibility. So I actually have the times for the trains here from the Times newspaper, and the article is called "The Catastrophe on the London and Brighton Railway," which is a much better title. You actually kind of know what's going on. But the first train left at 8:28 a.m. and the second one left at 8:31.
Oh, so they're only like a few minutes apart.
Yeah, so that's not ideal.
So how was it ideally supposed to work?
I believe there were supposed to be 5-minute intervals in between each train, and it was 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm. So was it supposed to be that the train would go in, and then the first signaling person would be like, okay, a train just went in, and then not let any other trains in until they got the signal from the person at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, so we'll see later on that the signalman at the beginning of the tunnel actually signals or telegraphs to the other one to ask if the train has gone through yet. So they do.
So they don't receive one; they send and like ask.
Yes. So, and as we'll see later on, the signalman, when the second train was coming in, tries to signal to the train that there was another train in there. So before I mention any names here, I do want to mention that I got the names from the Times article, the catastrophe on the London and Brighton Railway, and the Bell's Weekly Messenger one didn't have them. They had names of like doctors and things like that, but they didn't actually have the names of like the signalmen, for example, and other names that I'm going to be using, which I think is interesting, and I am assuming is because the article came out the day after the crash happened. So they prioritize getting certain names because they have I think it was 23 people, if I remember correctly, off the top of my head, that died. And it had every single name in that article. So I'm assuming that's what they prioritized, which is interesting because, I mean, it makes sense. But you can kind of tell where their priorities were with, like, getting those names and getting the article out as soon as possible versus the Times article, which came out about a week later. So what went wrong? Besides, obviously, them being in very close proximity to each other. So what went wrong was that the signalman's signal didn't signal. So when the other train started going in, the second one started to go in, the signalman. Now, the Bell's Weekly Messenger article says that he allegedly tries to signal, which is interesting to me because it kind of goes along with the idea that since they wanted to get the article out so quickly, they kind of couldn't get the specific points of view, so they might have put their own sort of artificial bias into it. What do you think, Jared?
I think that they said alleges because they don't have any proof of whether or not he actually signaled.
That I mean, yeah, that is true. That is a certainly a possibility. I just I kind of just think that along with everything else in the article, it kind of because when you read the whole thing, you'll see that they kind of have a maybe it's neutral when you get to this part, but then when you read the rest of it, it kind of talks about the driver as being like super confident in what he's doing, which kind of makes you look at the signalman in a more negative way, I guess. But I could just be looking too into things.
Yeah. So you're saying they're trying to make it look more like the fault of the signalman and like casting doubt on them rather than the conductor of the train?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a possibility. I don't think they really have much to gain from doing that specifically. I just think that, again, this came out the day afterwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were focused on getting the information on the people who died, and were probably less focused on, because they don't even have their names, right? They don't have the signalman's name or the driver's name, none of that. They have the names of the dead, they have the names of some of the doctors, but yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's reasonable, right? Like, because these guys were just involved in, like, a major accident. They don't want to ruin their careers by being like, yes, this Jonathan here, like, caused a major railway accident.
Well,
and he's currently looking for work.
That is, yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, but the other articles say their name. Like, the Times article says their names.
Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of their prerogative, right?
Well, yeah, I feel like it doesn't, your argument there doesn't really work if they're not saying their names, like, right after the thing. Like, I feel like if they didn't say their names ever, then, yeah, but...
So in a later issue, they said their names?
Well, not in the same newspaper.
Yeah, well, I mean, then we're comparing different newspapers.
True.
And I mean, different newspapers operate differently and have different standards.
So you think that it's not due to the date as much of it as it's due to just the way the newspaper operates? That could be it, because I admittedly haven't looked at any other new articles from Bell's Weekly, so it's possible.
It is possible.
And that's why you're here, Jared. That and entertainment value.
Doing what I can.
So where were we, Jared?
Rail crash.
So, two trains. Second one was going into the tunnel. It left early, like we said, and the signalman, whose name was Killick, Henry Killick, which was in the Times article and not the weekly one. He.
Wait, was he at the end or the beginning?
The beginning. He's the allegedly tried the signal.
Oh, so he tried to ask and didn't get a
No. He tried to signal. They have like actual signals that, like, it was supposed to be like a stop signal. But it didn't work, supposedly.
Oh, so he knew about the other train. He just couldn't get the signal up.
So he goes out and he tries to wave a red flag to get them to stop. And he's unsure if they see it at that point. But they do. So what's the driver's name? I do have it here. W. Gregory. So it was driven by W. Gregory. And I use the word driven instead of like conducted, because that's the wording that the article uses.
Yeah.
So that train, he did see the signal, the flag, I mean. So he starts putting his engine in reverse. He brakes and he puts the engine in reverse because he doesn't want to run into the other train, obviously. So Killick doesn't know. The signalman doesn't know. So that's when, like we talked about earlier, he telegraphs the other signalman to say, hey, is the train out yet? And he says yes. Also, another thing about the newspaper thing that we talked about earlier, this is when the driver is described as doubtless, and that's kind of why I was like, okay, it feels very, like, in favor of the driver here. But anyway, so, like I said, he telegraphs the man. He says that it's out. So a third train shows up. Yes?
So he doesn't know whether one or two trains are out?
He thinks that it's the second train.
Okay,
at
so
that
he
point.
thinks that the second train got
Yes.
out. So he thinks that the second train didn't see the
Well,
signal.
actually, I think
and they
the
both just
signal.
left.
Yeah, I think he thinks that they didn't see the signal, and that the first train is out for sure, and that since he thinks that they didn't see the signal, the second train would be out when the third train comes by.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, unless he thinks it's talking about the second train. Admittedly, the article wasn't super clear about this, but I believe. I mean, either way, he thinks it's safe for a third train that I also have the time for that. Left at 8:35, 4 minutes after the second train. So,
and the second train is still like slowing down at this point. Like,
they're
trying to
either
come to a
slowing down
stop?
or reversing at this point. I'm not entirely sure. The specifics, I mean, I don't think the people involved know the specifics of exactly what the thing. Though I do remember in the Times, they actually like had a conversation because it was like a what's the word, inquest, I think, into the whole incident and the deaths that occurred. Basically, kind of like a trial of sorts to figure out kind of who's to blame for this. So,
who ran this? Was it?
Hmm?
Who do you say ran this? Was this like the newspaper or like the government?
Oh, I think this was like an official, like an inquest is like a law. It's officially determined the cause of someone's death. So in this case, we're determining the person behind the cause, because we know the cause of these people's deaths. It was the train thing, but we don't really know like the real specifics of it, and that's just because of the way it kind of went. I mean, there aren't any cameras in the tunnel, so
Yeah, so it's just like one person's word against another person's word.
well, I think all the words kind of add up to like what happened. There's not
So
like
we do know what happened.
well, I'm talking about the specifics of like what we were talking about before with the like what actually happened, like because you asked if they were still braking or if they were reversing earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know for sure because I don't, like I said, I don't think the people know for sure. It was such like a, kind of not instantaneous, but like it was everything happened very quickly, right? But either way, I think in the Times article they do say the driver says that he thinks he was reversing at that point, and then the third train, which got through because of signalman Killick and his telegraph earlier, remember?
Mm-hmm.
They collide. The second and third trains collide. And that's bad.
It seems like it would be a lot worse for the second train than the third train.
Yeah, I believe the train, I think the third train basically kind of somehow goes almost on top of the second train. Not like on top, but like the engine like crushes some of like the what are they called?
Passengers?
Well, yeah, that too. But like the like
Carriages,
I guess. Yeah, it's not good. I have
sounds really bad, in fact.
yeah, and it's in a tunnel, so it's like practically complete darkness, and there's a train on top of another train. Not a good time. Loud noises everywhere. You can't help people because you can't see what's happening for the most part. And the article,
Did the third train conductor die?
I want to say no because I don't think I heard. I don't remember reading that, but that's a good question. I think most of the injury was to the second. Not to say that the people in the third train came out unscathed, but I think most of the injury was in the second one because the third one was going much faster.
Yeah. I mean, just in terms of physics, it would make sense for the second train to be more affected.
Mm-hmm. I'll be honest, I don't know. We're going to find out. So, after a bit of research and slight confusion with these articles, I've come to the conclusion that the head guard of the third train, at least, survived. Unless I'm missing something, I do not see anything about the driver of the third train. I feel like they would say if the driver died, like outright.
It didn't seem to be a big priority for them as listing out all the people who died.
That is true. So I feel like they'd make it clear if that had happened. So yeah, that was a fun little research detour. So where were we, Jared? Don't say rail crash.
Train crash.
Train crash. Let's see. So, right, we were talking about the actual crash, like as it was happening. So, the Bell's Weekly Messenger article gives some pretty not so pretty descriptions of some of the individuals in this accident, including people being hit with boiling water from the engines, being crushed by the engine of the third train.
Yeah, because the third train was on top of the second train.
People being thrown around. There's some specific descriptions of some of the deceased, including a woman with both her legs got cut off.
Did she survive? Oh, wait, no. You said deceased?
Yes, I said deceased. Another with her scalp removed and her arms broken. A man with a crushed face, his eyeballs forced out from his head. And yeah, so it didn't do, let's say, a great job with quelling the people's fears of this kind of thing happening, I would say.
Then next time you go and ride a train, all you can think about is like reading that in the newspaper.
Right. Yeah, it's not.
Like, you want to put your kids on a train that did that to someone?
Yeah, it's not. Like we said earlier with the roller coaster thing, that having that kind of thing would certainly help.
I don't know why the person at the end of the tunnel doesn't just send them a message every time they see a train come out of the tunnel.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, I mean, because he wouldn't have asked, he wouldn't have telegraphed if that's how it worked, right?
Yeah, but why wasn't that how it worked?
I don't know.
Why is it like
typically
asking and then it being like, yes, a train went through?
In their defense, I'm not trying to defend the system because it's not great, but if they had departed at the right intervals, it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
So
if he wouldn't have stopped the second train, I don't think it would have mattered.
True, but I get why he tried to stop the train.
I mean, yeah.
Because, if it caught up, then we would have had a different
Maybe
crash.
we just shouldn't have signal. Maybe we should just have the departures leave 5 minutes apart, rather than having people at signaling at a tunnel.
Yeah, they're supposed to leave 5 minutes apart.
Yeah, but the train station kept letting them go after 2 minutes.
Yeah, I mean that's and in the inquest, that's who they ended up blaming for it was the person working at the actual station letting them go early.
I see.
So yeah, it's interesting, and going back to the descriptions there and putting your kids on trains, definitely not helpful. Because I mean, trains are already new technology, right? I mean, going that fast was new. I mean, did we? I know we talked beforehand about horses.
Yeah.
Did we talk in the podcast about horses?
I don't think we did.
We didn't. So, horses were basically the fastest form of transportation at this point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing else unless you're somehow riding a cheetah, but I don't think that would work very well. So commonplace transportation, horse, and trains are faster than horses. So this is the first time people are moving that quickly. It's weird, right?
And you can get off of a horse.
You can stop a horse, you can control a horse. You can't do that on a train.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
like, even if someone was like, even if you had like a carriage, right, that you were in, and someone was like
driving.
Driving the horses.
Riding. Did you say driving the horses?
I mean,
we say driving trains. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, if they're like in the whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
So, if they're driving the horses, they're not going to be going so fast that you couldn't like jump out.
Yeah, right? I mean, you might get a scrape or, even if you break something, right? Like, it's not that.
Yeah.
It's still, you have an out.
I feel like it's like that mental component is like why people prefer doing like Invisalign over braces, because like you can't take braces off.
True.
Even if you don't take the Invisalign off, just knowing that you have the option to jump out of the carriage.
Yeah.
If all else fails, you can't really jump out of a train.
True. And there's other things too that kind of came along with railways being kind of put in the everyday person's transportation
the
facilities.
Transportation
You know what I mean?
zeitgeist.
Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say, huh?
The transportation zeitgeist.
You speak to that.
No.
Okay. For example, there was this thing. I was gonna say track mania. That's not right. There's like train mania, railway mania. I forget exactly what it's called.
Track mania.
That's a game.
That's what it was named after.
Oh, I see. Okay, and it was this concept that you could go like train crazy, right? Which to us, right, that doesn't really make any sense, but that's because we're used to these kind of new transportation methods.
I mean, if someone said like, if you're in space for too long, you go space crazy. I mean, I wouldn't really be able to dispute that.
Yeah, right?
You can't be like, well, last time I went to space, I didn't go crazy.
Exactly. I mean, it's like anything. Like, when cars were first being, like, adopted, I remember I heard somewhere that people were afraid of, like, women being, going that fast for some reason, because they thought they, like, couldn't handle it. That they're like
their frail constitution.
Yeah, right. And it's
too weak for trains.
No, it was for cars.
Oh, for cars.
Yeah. Which, to be fair, cars do go faster. At that time, I'm not sure if they did go faster at that time though.
Than trains?
Yeah, like the first cars. I guess they
went like.
Did they?
I don't think they went that fast.
Yeah, I don't know.
They topped out at like 20 miles an hour.
Well, I mean, still, right? It's just that kind of new technology. You're always gonna change is weird, right? And especially when your safety is directly linked to the weird change, right? So we have 23 people dead and 176 people injured. That's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people.
This was the biggest rail crash at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, not to say at the time to like, sort of put down how many people were involved in this, because this was a huge thing. This still is a huge thing.
For reference, the Hindenburg had 35 fatalities and completely made people stop using Zeppelins.
Yeah. I mean, transportation, right? I mean, like, you have no control. We talked about this with the horses, but you have no control in your life at that point. So, and it's hard to sort of resign yourself to that, I guess.
Mm.
So I want to move on. Do you have anything else to say about that part of it?
I don't think so.
Okay. I'd like to move on to talking a bit more about the Times article. And it follows the inquest into the deaths of those 23 people. So we get a few, and this is where I tried to look to find out about that third driver, and I couldn't find him. Admittedly, the formatting and the way I'm reading this is kind of difficult to work with. Um, it is the actual clipping from the actual newspaper, but it's on a website and it's kind of blurry. It's clipped by a dude named Slambo, whose picture looks like a disheveled man. It's kind of looks like a mad scientist. It's it is a primary source. It is very much that the Times article. It is just the formatting's a bit difficult. But I didn't see anything on that driver. What I do see, however, is multiple points of view here, and they all kind of confirm the same thing, which is why earlier I was saying how we have multiple people's words and stuff. You were saying how it was kind of like people's words against each other. They're not really going against each other that much. They're all kind of saying the same thing. All the people who were on the trains the second train that reversed were like, yeah, he saw the thing, we heard the whistle, we put it in.
So we know what happened. It was just hard to determine who was at fault.
Yeah, that's what the inquest is for.
Yeah.
And with that previous situation that I was talking about with you earlier, the issue wasn't really who was at fault. We were just talking about exactly whether they were in reverse or not at that point, and it was just hard to tell.
Yeah.
But yeah, we know basically what happened. The inquest is to figure out who is to blame. It's basically like a trial. So in the end, they decide that Henry Killick, the signalman, is not at fault, and that none of the drivers are at fault, right? Because, I mean, just logically, right, you can't really blame any single person involved that we've talked about so far, right? The signalman, the Killick, right, he was just... His signal didn't work, allegedly, didn't work, and so he waved his red flag to try and get their attention, to say stop, and he wasn't sure if they saw it. And then he, with his limited information from the other signalman, he did what he thought would have the smoothest, keep the smoothest operation going.
Yeah. So, but was it then responsible of him... I agree that he did the right thing waving the flag, but was it enough on his part to not check if the train had left the tunnel?
Well, he did. He thought he did.
Well, but he didn't know for sure, right? Because they just knew all of the information he had was a train exited the tunnel. He doesn't know what train, and he lets the third train through. So shouldn't he have really stopped the third train and checked to make sure that the second train had left and then let the third train through?
I agree, but I don't really feel like we can blame him in this situation.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I think that was a point of carelessness that could have prevented this whole situation.
Yeah.
I think he didn't err on the side of caution.
I agree. I think he was a bit too convinced that they didn't see the flag, and he just went with that, and was like, okay. And then when he got the telegraph back that, the train's gone, the train went through already, he just kind of took that and he was like, okay, then we're good. So I do agree. I think he could have erred more on the side of caution there, but I think in the situation, right, you kind of want things to go as smoothly as possible. So, I think he was convinced that it was safe.
Yeah.
And we see in the inquest that he isn't found guilty for any sort of negligence here. Neither are any of the drivers. It ends up being, like we were talking about earlier, the person who was actually at the station letting them go that early.
Yeah,
in
because
that
they shouldn't be letting them go
Yeah.
any closer than 5 minutes apart.
Yeah, that's the whole point of the
I
system.
do agree that they were the most responsible because they didn't give them enough buffer time.
Yeah.
And we're just trying to let as many trains through as possible.
Yeah. Also, I don't know if you're sick of hearing about my newspaper theories here.
You're full of them.
I like I said, this was meant to be like about how people felt towards them, but then the newspaper thing was kind of interesting. So, and I don't mind kind of changing up focus a little bit because honestly, I think this is a little bit more interesting. So, the Times article has accounts from the underguard of the second train, who was William Butcher. And he just kind of confirms what we already knew, like I said. But what's interesting is the article was published on September 11th. So well after the actual incident had occurred. And this is all for the inquest that they're giving this information. So that kind of goes into what I was saying earlier about how, since they were focused on getting certain information, they didn't really look too into getting actual accounts like this, because they wouldn't have been able to right afterwards, you know what I mean? Which I guess isn't really a theory, it's just, I mean, it is a theory, but it kind of just, it's less of a sort of conspiracy than they were trying to put their own spin on the events thing from earlier, right?
Yeah.
It's more of just what is more likely to have happened, because, I mean, you're not going to get, hey, you've just been in a major train crash. Do you want to tell us about it, you know? Probably more worried about the relief effort with that. So, also, I said he's the underguard of the second train. So, the head guard, underguard, guard means conductor, I believe. I know I said driver earlier. Train things are complicated, but guard is conductor, so underguard is like under the conductor, I think. Yeah. But there's also like an engine driver. There's different roles, and they're kind of there's a lot of roles, which I mean is good, because generally a lot more roles means more people to kind of cover for mistakes that lead to crashes. Unfortunately, this wasn't a in-train issue as much as it was an out-of-train issue.
Yeah, I don't think anyone in the trains did anything wrong.
Oh, no.
Because they're relying on them to tell them what to do, and all the conductors did exactly what they were told.
Yeah. It really... I think the inquest was perfectly in the right to put the blame on the man at the station. Yeah, also, it was the assistant station master. His name was Charles Legg. By the way. I didn't mention that earlier, but I just got to it in my notes. And he was charged with manslaughter from negligence, but he didn't actually go to jail for it. He was just kind of
fired.
Well, I think it's safe to assume, they don't actually say it, but I think it's safe to assume that he lost his position there. But it was definitely kind of a mess of a situation. What with Killick's thing and, the station master, all that. It was quite a big fiasco, we could say. I have one more primary source here, another newspaper article from the Yorkshire Gazette, from November 30th, 1861. It was a Saturday, if you wanted to know. And this one's also very simple. It's just called the Clayton Tunnel Incident. Which, I mean, to be fair...
There was an incident at Clayton Tunnel.
There was an incident at Clayton Tunnel, and you really, at this point, like, this is after it, I think everybody knows what you're talking about when you say that thing at Clayton Tunnel.
Yeah.
So, turns out that several claims were filed against the Brighton Railway Company.
I mean, I feel like that's to be expected.
That is to be expected, but most of them were settled by the company.
So they spent a lot of money, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and they're about to spend more, because a woman named Gardner was widowed because of this incident. She lost her husband, and she received £500 for damages. And I didn't know this, but apparently 1861 pounds and 2022 pounds are very different. And, like, I figured, because, like, you know, I mean... Inflation, right?
Cars used to cost, like, $200.
Yeah, but I did not think it was to this extent.
Yeah.
Unless I mean, I tried multiple websites, multiple, like, inflation calculators. I tried looking this up. I didn't find a whole lot on the actual, like, inflation of the pound. But, oddly enough, all the calculator websites were, like, the exact same website, but, like, with different URLs and different... Like, it was clearly, like, the same layout and everything. But they were on different websites. It was really weird. But they all came up with the number that 500 pounds is the equivalent of 66,150 pounds and 26... Is it pence?
Probably.
I think so. Which is a lot.
I don't know. I feel like that's what you would get...
Well,
from,
yeah.
like, a mid-tier life insurance policy, right?
I don't think it's a lot in terms of what she was owed. I think it's a lot in terms of it was 500 pounds.
Yeah, that is crazy.
Did you know about this?
No.
That's, I don't know. I was just surprised.
Wait, when did this happen? What year?
1861.
I mean,
it was a while ago. It's just weird because like, I think
it was like what, like 150. America was like 100 years old.
Yeah.
Not even.
I think 1 pound was like 112 pounds or something. It was,
wow.
Yeah, it's a lot. So maybe that's why there were like shillings, right?
Yeah, like the really
like
tiny.
Yeah, the tiny denominations. That would make sense.
Yeah. It would make pence.
And I think that's a good place to wrap up this podcast. Thank you for your additions here, Jared.
My pleasure.
Do you wanna maybe? Is there anything else you wanna mention about what we've talked about today?
This was a really horrible incident that was probably pretty easily avoided.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that people would be distrusting of trains after this got the news coverage that it got, especially with how dramatic it was.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
I mean, that combined with how it seems like people were already kind of weary of trains, I think it is a miracle that people use trains as much as they did in England after this.
Yeah, and there were other crashes that happened after this too, obviously. Yeah. Trains are scary.
Trains are scary.
Especially when trains are the fastest thing you got.
And I mean, they were like trying to get people to put these in their, like, through their neighborhoods and stuff, right? Because I mean, trains going in a straight line. Trains
are going in a straight line.
Like more, like, unless it absolutely has to turn, it's going in a straight line.
Yeah.
And that's gonna go through a lot of things that people might be angry about having a train nearby for.
Yeah.
Because if they're like, I don't want a train crash in my backyard, it might be hard to add the infrastructure that they need.
And from the perspective of sensationalist things, I think trains were very sensational, and they also took part, obviously, as we've seen today, in sensational events, which, I mean, makes sense, right? If you're going to have something...
I feel like this is like the name of the assignment.
Well, I mean, if you look on Moodle, it's the class is Victorian sensation.
Okay, yeah.
The topic is definitely of things that caused a sensation.
I would say trains caused a sensation.
Trains did, and this was a sensational event.
It has sensational approval as far as I'm concerned.
What?
I think that's a good spot to leave off. Thank you for tuning in to the Victorian Sensation podcast. We'll be back next week
We will?
talking about dresses
Dresses?
in Victorian England.
Okay. I guess we'll see about that. Thank you all for listening, and have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Welcome to Citation Corner. The primary sources used in this presentation are as follows. Bell's Weekly Messenger, Terrible Railway Accident. Published Monday, 26th of August, 1861. The Times, The Catastrophe on the London and Brighton Railway. Published Wednesday, September 11th, 1861. And finally, the Yorkshire Gazette, The Clayton Tunnel Incident. Published Saturday, November 30th, 1861.